last week. I think it should have been this time last week. I was having a nice long facts video. We're back with another. This evening's isn't going to be quite as long, but hopefully it will be just as interesting. This was a requested video. I really need to get into the habit of searching for the comment that left it so we can give proper credit, but whoever requested this, you know who you are. But we're going to be taking a little look into the Wild West, slowly whispering some facts about the time period, way of life, both, I guess. So yeah, hopefully you find it entertaining, informative, and of course relaxing. Without further ado, let's get into the facts. So fact number 1, the first quick draw gunfight occurred in Springfield, Missouri. It was between the famous gunslinger Wild Bill Hickok and a man named Davis Tutt. The two had had a dispute over gambling winnings. Tutt underwrote other gamblers in an attempt to clean Hickok out and run him out of town. But Hickok won, and Tutt demanded $40 from Hickok over a previous deal about a horse. According to Tom Clavin's Wild Bill, the true story of the American frontier's first gunfighter, Hickok gave Tutt the $40 then and there, but Tutt then demanded another $25. When Hickok wouldn't budge, Tutt grabbed Hickok's pocket watch from the table. The following day, Tutt brandished it about the town square of Springfield, Missouri, on the morning of July 21st, 1865. Hickok had tried to reason with Tutt, but the man refused. Just before 6 p.m, Hickok warned Tutt not to wander across the square with that watch. Tutt reached for his gun. Hickok reached for his. The two paused, then drew, with Hickok finishing the fight by sending a bullet through Tutt's heart. It was the first quick-draw fight ever recorded. Word about it spread, and 2 years later the above illustration accompanied an article in Harper's New Monthly magazine, and I'll put it right here for your viewing pleasure. Next fact is, millions of bison were slaughtered. Estimates range from 10 to 30 million. Roamed America in the early 1800s, and by the early 1900s there were less than 1,000. The American buffalo were ruthlessly slaughtered. Most of them were shot by people commissioned by United States Army or the Army itself. The American buffalo was a primary source of food and hide for Native Americans, and the United States wanted to wipe them out, beginning in 1830. Next fact, cowboys didn't wear 10-gallon hats. Hats were a necessity for most outside activities in the Old West, but they weren't wearing those oversized headpieces called 10-gallon hats. Those were made popular in the 1920s via Hollywood depictions of cowboys. Instead, cowboys and ranchers, farmers, and people of most other professions wore a flat-brimmed Stetson called the Boss of the Plains. John Stetson himself noticed that the hats being worn in the plains were unsuitable for the weather. Hats made of straw, silk, fur, and wool were too hot in the summer, or absorbed or captured rain during the spring. The Boss was lightweight, waterproof, and durable. The inside was insulated enough that it could be used as a bucket of water for a horse, while the brim shed water and was wide enough to protect the neck and eyes from the sun. They retailed for $4.50 and were made with nutria fur. That's about $74 in today's terms. You could see famous gunmen perform for shows. Imagine imagine going to a stage play in New York City to see Buffalo Bill Cody and Wild Bill Hickok tell tales around a campfire? Well, that's exactly what happened. Cody came up with a travelling show called Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show, and he had several different cast members. The most famous of all was Hickok. There weren't just stage shows either. There were staged buffalo hunts and recreations of famous events, like a stagecoach robbery. The next fact is the stage plays were poorly done. While fancy gunplay and dramatic recreations of well-known events were probably fun for everyone, the indoor stage plays that Cody invented were awful. But it was a good kind of awful, like watching a terrible movie that's so bad it was good. Cody and his fellow players were not thespians, nor did they have a good writer. These stage plays would involve Cody and others like Hickok sitting around a fire telling stories and cracking jokes. But the acting was so bad that the audience would laugh for all the wrong reasons. During one play, Hickok was angry enough, or perhaps drunk enough, or both, to whip out his pistol and blast out a stage light in front of a live audience. This next fact is Elmer McCurdy's corpse had more fun than he did. Elmer McCurdy was 31 years old when he was shot dead, killed by police after robbing a train in Oklahoma in 1911. It was the last of a series of botched robberies that McCurdy had attempted during his short life. McCurdy and his pals mistakenly robbed a passenger train of just $46, misidentifying it as a Katy train carrying thousands. After McCurdy was killed, the sheriff apparently sold his body to a carnival owner who mummified it. If this sounds macabre, well, that's because it is. But it also was something carnivals used to do back in the 1920s and 30s. The carnival owner used McCurdy's dead body as part of a travelling sideshow, displaying him as the outlaw who would never be captured alive, and later as an example of a dope fiend. Poor McCurdy ended up in a warehouse where the body stayed until 1968. Over time, people forgot it was old McCurdy and assumed it was a prop. It, along with other wax figures, was sold to the Hollywood Wax Museum, but the corpse was later sold off to an amusement park in California, where it ended up as part of a funhouse exhibit. In 1976, the production crew for The $6 Million Man was filming in that amusement park, and McCurdy was discovered. One of the crew moved the body, and McCurdy's arm popped off. By that time it was covered in wax and paint. He was returned to Guthrie, Oklahoma in 1977, and buried finally 66 years after his death. That is hilarious but so morbid. That is literally a man's body just getting tossed around like a prop, because most people probably didn't even realise it actually used to be a person. Okay, this next fact states gun control was stricter back then. When you envision the Old West, you might think that everyone in a saloon had a 6-shooter on their hip and an 1873 Winchester under their hotel pillow. Well, that's not true, at least not in many fledgling towns on the new frontier. Many towns like Deadwood, Dodge City, Abilene and Tombstone had laws prohibiting carrying guns in towns. You had to check your guns at the local sheriff, who'd give you a token in exchange, like a coat check but for guns. Exceptions were made for residents who could keep their guns in their home. Dead outlaws were propped up and notorious outlaws were chronicled in papers throughout the country. When they went down in a blaze of glory, townspeople wanted proof, and the authorities wanted to show any would-be lawbreaker who came to town the fate that awaited them. With the invention of photography during the first quarter of the 19th century, now there was a way to do both. The corpses of dead outlaws would be displayed, sometimes entire gangs pushed together, sometimes a duo stood up and propped together, for one final photograph before being tossed 6 feet under. I kind of like that in a morbid way, like it's one last bit of humiliation, even though they're not alive to, get embarrassed by it. But okay, the first armed bank robbery occurred in Massachusetts. It wasn't the Wild West where the first bank robbery happened. The first bank robbery occurred in 1831, roughly 30 years before the Wild West era. But that robbery was done with forged keys and the robbers didn't use guns. The first stick-em-up, non-war related bank robbery occurred in 1863 in Malden, Massachusetts. The deadly event occurred at noon when a man named Edward Green, the town's 32-year-old postmaster, walked into Malden Bank to get change. Green was a drunk and was heavily in debt. When he entered the bank on December 15th, he thought he saw a way out. Only one person was working at the time, a 17-year-old boy and son of the bank's president. Green walked home, grabbed his gun and shot the boy in the head. He walked out once again, this time with $5,000 in cash, which equates to about $105,000 today. But Green arose suspicions when people noticed that the once-in-debt postmaster could now pay his dues. Reportedly, he confessed to the murder just a month later and was hanged in 1866. That made him the first man hanged for an armed robbery back in America. Want to die like the Old West? You probably don't. Probably to the surprise of nobody, food in the Wild West was pretty awful. Breakfast might be the exception, with cornbread, stew, boiled eggs, fried potatoes and omelettes being some good-looking food. Dinner might consist of calf's head, boiled mutton, or soused, or soused. Never seen that term in my life. Calf's feet, anyway. For dessert you could get pudding. These are typical foods of a family on the frontier in 1853. Food cooking was simple. Think ovens, frying pans and roasting spits. And the food would have been restricted to whatever meat or veggies was available during that time of year. Cowboys typically ate canned beans, rock-hard biscuits, dried meat, dried fruit, and coffee. And apparently, this next fact states the whiskey was terrible. Strut through a saloon's doors, saddle up on a bar stool, order the bartender's finest whiskey, and then proceed to gag. This stuff tastes like gasoline, but the bottle says it's been aged 10 years and comes from Kentucky. So what gives? Back then, laws against copyright were lax, if enforceable at all, and since you're in the frontier, there was no one around to care. Heck, a lot of the whiskey being sold might have been mixed with water or other spirits to increase profits. According to Serious Eats, some of the so-called bourbons was sometimes distilled from low-grade molasses. It's bourbons, isn't it? Bourbons. Nicknames for popular whiskey in that era include Coffin Varnish, Mountain Howitzer, and Tangle Leg. Which the thinking behind Tangle Leg was next fact. Cowboy meant criminal. In the Old West, especially in and around Arizona, cowboy meant criminal. In 1881, the San Francisco Examiner wrote an editorial declaring, "Cowboys are the most reckless class of outlaws in that wild country, infinitely worse than the ordinary robber." In fact, there was a famous gang known as the Cowboys who frequented Tombstone. The famous OK Corral shootout wasn't actually much of a shootout. Yes, 3 people died and 3 were injured in the OK Corral shootout in Tombstone, Arizona. But for all its fame, the famous gunfight was little more than 30 seconds of gunfire. On the law side, there were 3 Earp brothers, Wyatt, Morgan and Virgil, and Doc Holliday. On the bad guy side were Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McClary, and Billy Claiborne, members and associates of the Cowboy Gang. Only 3 of them were armed. It's unknown who shot first, but the entire fight lasted just 30 seconds. And 30 bullets. Virgil shot Clanton in the chest, Doc Holliday blasted Tom with a shotgun, and Wyatt killed Frank with a gunshot. Clanton and Claiborne ran away uninjured and unarmed. The Earps and Holliday were tried for murder, and the ensuing testimony featured people sympathetic to the Cowboys, and those on the Earp side. A judge ruled in favour of the Earps and Holliday, and they were acquitted. America's first serial killer family emerged. Lovely. The Wild West is mostly known for its gunslingers and outlaws, but serial killers played a part too. The Bender family, aka the Bloody Benders, that's a good name for a band, that, the Bloody Benders, were a family of German immigrants who lived in Labette County, Kansas, for just 1 year from 1871. The family cabin had a well and a barn with a corral, and they divided the cabin into a general store and a small lodging home for travellers. By contemporary accounts, the people were mean, strange or off-putting. In total, 4 Benders lived on the property. Oh, I'm so mature. John Bender Sr. and his wife Elvira, along with their son John Jr. and his girlfriend Kate, who may have been his sister. Those pesky Benders. The family is believed to have killed at least 11 people, and their remains were buried in the orchard. As people began to question the disappearances and close in on the Benders, the family vanished. And the next fact, Dodge City was extremely violent. While the Wild West was not as violent as movies and TV shows would have you believe, it wasn't some kind of lawless paradise. Dodge City in Kansas is the most notoriously violent town from that area. Dodge City had an annual recorded murder rate of 165 adults killed per 100,000 people. That also means that a person living in Dodge City had a 1 in 61 chance of being murdered. Well, and the final fact is camels in Texas. Yep. For a brief period of time you may have come across a wild camel or two while braving the plains of Texas. In 1855, the US government allocated $30,000 to buy and import camels. Jefferson Davis, then the Secretary of War, believed that camels would be essential in transporting goods westward. So the government imported 75 camels and stationed them in Camp Verde, located in central Texas, and used them in supply trips to San because of the flower moon, and that's what kind of reminded me that somebody had, requested facts about the Wild West. So here we are. So that is going to do it for this evening's video. As always, thank you so much for spending your time with me this evening and watching the video.